Well, good evening and welcome to Inside the Ronald C. Collection. My name is Haley Page, the Exhibition and Events Manager at the Center for Road Photography and Art. We are so excited so many of you have made the time to join us tonight for this special online program. And we are recording tonight's program and it will be made available on our YouTube page in the next few weeks. So make sure to go check that out along with all of our other past programs on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/railphotoart. Tonight, we are going to hear from our Associate Archivist, Heather Sonntag, as she dives into the spectacular Ronald C. collection. And later in the program, we'll be joined by close friends of the late Ron Hill for our Q&A, Jeff Browse and Tim Tong. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to run through some quick housekeeping information and briefly introduce the center. As a reminder, we use Zoom webinar for our presentations, and this means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or camera during the event. You can change the way you like to view your presentation in the top right corner of your Zoom screen under that icon View. And at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of other icons. Please use the chat function for any comments you have during the presentation. By selecting everyone, you will ensure that the rest of the audience can't see your comment. And please use the Q&A icon to submit any questions. Following the main presentation, we will be hosting a Q&A session. If you have a question at any point during tonight's presentation, make sure you post that in the Q&A, not the chat, to make sure that we see it. I want to thank all of our regular viewers for tuning in again tonight, as well as welcome all first-time viewers. The Center for Road Photography and Art is a membership-supported organization with a mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading, and we accomplish that mission in a few ways. We offer an online programming series, and that's what you're tuning into tonight. Our programs are monthly and cover a wide range of topics in the world of railroading. We promote these programs regularly through our e-blasts and on social media. So make sure you keep up to date by checking regularly on our website and our all those social media icons that we have down there, as well as reading the e-blasts that come in to your inbox. All of our programs are entirely free and most are available to stream on our YouTube channel. Again, that link is youtube.com/railphotoart, and this one will be posted in a few weeks. Our next program will be Collections from England's National Railway Museum on Tuesday, April 25th. We will hear from Ed Bartholomew, lead curator of the National Railway Museum, York, England, and get an inside look at the museum's collections. Our annual Conversations Conference will take place next month in Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois, over the weekend of April 14th to the 16th. And I'm happy/sad to say that we are completely sold out. Conversations is a great opportunity to interact with active road photographers and artists and industry leaders. We usually open registration for that event in January, so if you didn't get a ticket this year, make sure to check in with us around the new year to reserve your spot for 2024. We also oversee a traveling exhibitions program. The center does not maintain our own museum space. Instead, we partner with institutions to host our shows. Currently, we have 4 exhibitions on display and 1 more planned for 2023. And we also have 3 online exhibitions available for viewing, and you can check those out at our website. Every year, we host an awards contest called the John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards Program. This year's theme is the role of technology. Submission is currently open and it runs until May 1st. Winners of the program receive cash prizes and will be published in the Center's Journal of Railroad Heritage, as well as Railfan and Railroad. An exhibition of the winners will also be displayed at the Colorado Road Museum. And we do publications. Railroad Heritage is our ad-free quarterly journal, and it is a benefit of membership. Back copies of the magazine are available on our website. And our next print publication will be Rio Grande Steam Finale, which will be released in October. Pre-orders for that are going to be available in late summer, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, we have our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive. It's a representative collection encompassing the many styles and subjects of rail photography and art from the early 19th century to the present. And we have over 900,000 items committed to our collection, and a fantastic team working to process and make all of the imagery visible. One of our collections is Ron Hill's, and we'll learn a bit more about that in a few moments. All of the work we do at the center is made possible by members and donations. Support from our community provides 70% of our funding. If you're a member already, we thank you. And if you'd like to join, we'd love to have you. Membership includes access to our quarterly members-only presentations, discounts at our annual conference, and 4 issues of our journal, Railroad Heritage. You can learn more about us and join and find out how to join and much more at our website, railphoto-art.org. I'd now like to introduce our program and presenters tonight. As many of you probably know, Ronald C. Hill passed away just over 2 months ago on January 23rd at the age of 85. Ron gifted his collection to the center a little over 2 years ago, and captured in it is a tremendous legacy of road preservation, infrastructure, and landscapes covering much of the United States, Western Canada, and Europe. When Heather Sonntag joined the center in 2020 as our new associate archivist, one of her first large-scale projects was cataloging and digitizing the Ron Hill collection. After spending nearly 15 months processing the collection of approximately 27,000 items, Heather now sees Ron as the whole railfan package. Through exploration of Ron's impeccable camera work, which spans 60 years from 1957 to 2018, Heather learned the ropes of rail photography. Tonight, we'll hear about Ron's long career in heritage rail preservation, book publishing, darkroom printing, and rail fanning. We'll also get to enjoy a selection of Heather's chosen zingers along mainlines and narrow gauge tracks across the Rocky Mountain West and elsewhere in North America. Following Heather's presentation, we'll move into a Q&A where we will be joined by 2 of Ron's close friends, Jeff Browse and Tim Tong. Jeff is a member of the center's board of directors and has been a friend of Ron Hill for over 50 years. He brings the center knowledge of 19th and 20th century photography and a broad background in publishing, with 7 photography books to his credit. You can read Jeff's moving tribute to Ron in our latest edition of Railroad Heritage, which is available on our website. And Tim is also a member of the center and has known Ron since 1977 when he met him at the Colorado Railroad Museum. The two traveled together across California, New Mexico, and Wyoming, as well as to the center's annual conference. Now, we expect tonight's program to run over an hour, so I'm mentioning again that we are recording tonight's presentation and that will be posted publicly on our YouTube channel in the next few weeks. And with that, I'd like to kick it over to Heather.
Hey, can you see that?
Looks good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Haley, for organizing everything and that nice introduction. Also to Scott and Haley for asking me to present on Ron Hill. I've been looking forward to this since December, and I started before Christmas to plan this evening. So I hope that you'll all appreciate how Ron truly was and is the whole railfan package. Before I move into showing you what I started learning about, I need to advance that way. Just a reminder that there are these lovely tributes to Ron at the center, on the center's page under collections specific to Ron that Scott wrote up. And there's a bibliography attached to that. And Kevin Keefe put out a very nice tribute as well on Trains Magazine. Justin Franz also, I learned in my preparing for tonight, put one out on Railfan and Railroader magazine, which has a nice small gallery of images. So I'm going to start off with truly inside the archive, our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive. And I need to change my viewing. There we go. I'm going to start with the timeline. As Haley mentioned, a couple of years ago in 2019, Ron donated his collection. And by 2020, all the color slides, small black and white prints, and negatives were transferred to us here in Madison. I was hired as a contract archivist in 2020 of December. And for the next couple of months, I was basically working on the preliminary processing plan, figuring out how we would best organize and describe this collection and how that would dictate our digitization. By March 2021, I started digitizing, and that was really full force for the whole next year. But I took a little hiatus in July to focus on the small black and white prints and negatives. And then by the spring of 2022, Scott had traveled out to Denver and was able to help Ron transfer the last of his large prints to us, which I finished between March and May of last year. I am having to figure out how to use this. All right. The collection overview is the date range, as Haley mentioned, is 1957 to 2018. And the bulk dates are 1970s to the 1990s, though after tonight's, preparing tonight's presentation, I could probably bump the 70s back to the 60s. The geographical locations focus on Canada, South Africa, and the United States. Ron started traveling annually in 1981 to Europe, but we actually don't have any of his European images. United States is naturally the bulk of the material. Colorado, far surpassing any other state. Wyoming is right behind that. And then California, Montana, New Mexico could come in a tertiary level. And the other in white of the states are really a smattering here and there. I could also say that British Columbia is very well represented in the collection. Now, if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, this is what the bankers boxes look like when they came in. Jeff had helped Ron package these up in 2020. When we received them, they had his handwriting on the outside that let us know which railroads were represented in each box. And every banker's box housed what you see on the right, 12 Leica cartons. Each carton, if you don't know about Leica boxes, it was my first time to learn about them, have 2 trays. Each tray holds 50 slides. And that top image is corresponding to the upper left-hand box. It says UPCP, the Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific. And it shows all of Ron's meticulously typed out stickers, which would let him know what the contents of the box were, and then the years. And they were numbered as well, and they were advanced chronologically. I admired him because he really thought like an archivist in this regard. The bottom right-hand image is just to give you a sense for how, I wouldn't call, they were jumbled. It's our job as archivists to rearrange these, but that one box there with all those 12 Leica boxes are representing everything from Union Pacific to Colorado and Southern, Burlington Northern and Santa Fe, as well as Southern railroads, all spanning from 1961 to 2012. So I had my work cut out for me in figuring out what 21 bankers boxes would look like across the whole collection. I sent my proposal, my preliminary processing plan to Adrian and Scott, and we met to discuss the best ways in which to organize this collection. And the left-hand list of box number and noted railroad is what we came up with. And throughout every box, when I finished a box of 12 cartons, I would map it out. And that's what the right-hand side is showing you, that I thought it would be a really good idea to devise these finding tools per box so that when you take the lid off of each box, you see how the Leica cartons are arranged within, what the railroad is, what the years are, as well as the geographical locations. And so this is what it looked like from being unprocessed on the left-hand side to completing the processing. And it's always really a celebratory moment, though it might be private per archivist. When you can finally adhere the labels to the outside of the box, you know that the collection has been fully arranged and described and digitized, and it's living all together in the same place in perpetuity. This is another chart based on the earlier one you saw. Scott and Adrian really, they left me to my own devices and entrusted me thoroughly. I was working by myself in an archive, which was not attached to the office. And I thought as a contract archivist, I should be accountable for my work. So in order to send them a report of my progress on digitization, I drew up this stats chart, which basically shows you the number, the boxes that as I went through them, how many slides were per box, roughly 1,200 in each, the number that I digitized and what that is the percentage of per banker's box. And really you want to look at the bottom in bold that we had 24,450 slides. I digitized 3,203, which is 13% of the collection. Ron's meticulous note-taking, his creator inscriptions made my life very easy in indexing the metadata for the railroad, the type of freight, the type of equipment, the location, which you see on the two side slides that I've included. But he also was really meticulous on noting you could call it technical data, his camera, what lens he used, and the date that he took his images. And this is true for every single carton, every single tray, every single item which is the slide that I touched. And what it also told me is that Ron meticulously edited his slides before we received them. He was equally meticulous with his negatives. So we received the 35 millimeter strips, and each individually housed in a glassine sleeve with handwriting on the outside that dated that image content, and also gave the geographical location. But I wanted to capture those notes. And these glassine sleeves, by the time we got them, had turned to onion skin. So naturally, we're going to put them in poly preservers. And I was able to capture his note-taking by Xeroxing those sleeves, so that when you open every binder, the notes are facing the corresponding 35 millimeter strip. So on the left-hand side, we see the Great Western Railway in Loveland, Colorado from 1961. And the bottom would have been a railfan trip, Pacific chapter of the Railroad and Locomotive Historical Society, and also in 1961. And then the right-hand side, those negatives are of the Durango narrow gauge in 1960. And these creator inscriptions continued. In 2022, I noticed that he was very detailed on the backs of his 8x10 prints. The top capturing the railroad, the type of train, the location. The lower left-hand corner is his technical data of the camera and the lens, across from the date. But the notes in the middle are his developing information. And I had called Ron last December, right before Christmas, to check in with him. I'd only spoken with him once before that, and I really wanted to learn more about his black and white developing. And he said that he would develop a lot on weekends, by morning, starting in the morning and then ending by the afternoon, putting them in the blotter paper to dry. And when I remarked on how meticulous his notes were, he kind of had a characteristic Ron quip. He said, "Well, I thought somebody would want to know." And surely we do want to know, and hopefully researchers will come and be interested in his processing. And I learned from Jeff that he was a big proponent of the Ansel Adams zoning process. This is what the prints look like when they came to us in the albums on the left-hand side. I've stacked them there according to railroad. And he, again, meticulously arranged these chronologically, and gave each album its own Roman numeral number. We removed them from the sleeves and folded them, which is the upper right-hand image. And then they went into their boxes with the labels, meaning that part of the processing was done. Now, working with the black and white formats after I'd already seen so much color in the slides, I began to link the black and white and color. And so here's an example, 1 week apart, of the Rio Grande Zephyr at the 23rd Street Viaduct. Classic Ron Hill shot, elevated looking down. He's really, as you all probably are well familiar, he routinely went back to the same vantage points over and over again. And this is a really nice comparison of or juxtaposition of this train leaving towards Salt Lake City out of the Denver Union Terminal in 1971. So in the end, I'm not going to read all these numbers. I just really want you to see what the collection contents consists of, as the totals of 27,088 items, with the color slides, the negatives, and the prints. And then we have digitized 3,551 for our digital collection. Now, in 2020, we also received 4 paintings, watercolors by Howard Fogg. And in my conversation with Ron last December, I asked him specifically about how did he acquire these paintings? And he told me that he met Howard on a railfan trip. Howard, as you all probably well know, was from Boulder, Colorado, and Ron being in Denver, it's no surprise that they would bump into each other. And he mentioned that they got along famously from the start. And so these paintings from the right top and going clockwise are Winter on Rogers Pass. And then below that is the Milwaukee Roads Steam Locomotive 131. And then this really cool South African Railway steam train of a Garrett 741, which apparently is a translation of one of Ron's own photographs from when he was in South Africa. And then one that's not pictured here is of a Canadian Pacific diesel locomotive in wintertime. And in preparing for tonight's talk, I went and looked at his personal file here in our office, and I noticed that he had a lot of, he would frequently use Ron would frequently use Howard Fogg note cards. And with Scott's permission, I'd like to share with you some of Ron's personal letters to Scott to inject his own voice and his own fountain pen here right now. So on April 15th, 2016, dear Scott, it was an honor to be invited to participate in the conference last weekend. I thoroughly enjoyed the entire program. Thank you so much. Sincerely, Ron Hill. And a couple years later, on January 4th, he writes, dear Scott, every now and then I pick up a copy of the British magazine Railway. The last issue I got had a supplement dealing with artistic photography, and it is not as weird and crazy as some. I thought you might like to have it. Do not return it. My very best wishes for every happiness in the new year. And I began to put these pieces together that Ron and Howard did truly have a strong friendship, so much so that he would write the introduction for Ron and Jeff's first co-authored book together that came out in 1975, Railroading West, A Contemporary Glimpse. And I'd just like to read what Howard wrote about Jeff and Ron's photos. Railroading West is a picture book, pure and simple. No statistics, no history, no maps, no ponderous prose of any sort. This volume must and will succeed solely on eye appeal, the appeal of Milwaukee Electrics on St. Paul Pass, of Donner and Dunsmuir, the Montana and Colorado Rockies, the Santa Fe and Burlington Northern, and Rio Grande. The camera work is varied, ranging from crisp action to detail to hauntingly artistic mood shots. There are several group shots to give one the full flavor of a train approaching, passing, and leaving the viewer. And this was very much my experience of working with Ron's images, that I found them to be varied and full of great diversity in his eye and perspective of where he would turn his lens. And this book project endeavor would continue on into the late 90s, when Ron would honor Howard and his paintings by co-authoring a book with Al Scioni on the railroading artistry of Howard Fogg. And Howard's paintings would continue to grace the covers of Ron's books. You'll see a couple later this evening, but here's one from a small pamphlet that I think really synthesizes all of what Ron all that inspired and excited Ron, the art and the friendship that he had with Howard, the love of heritage trains and the steam engines, and the connection to other railroad photographers, like that of distinguished photographer Richard Kindig, who helped co-author this small pamphlet of the locomotive 346, The First 100 Years. And that takes us into Ron's other passion, railroad preservation. So we have very few images that are actually of the late 1950s. And this are a couple from the Denver Rio Grande Railroad yard when he was 20 years old. And I noticed too that as I was processing the collection, he was frequently taking pictures of displays, and they're not that many. And I wondered, should I digitize these or not? And I thought, yes, I should, because they're very, he had obviously a concern and an interest in the history of railroading. And this is an extension of that. So here's an image of Cinderella of the Rockies, the Rio Grande narrow gauge, on display at the Denver Civic Center in 1959. And at this time, this engine was 75 years old and had been retired in 1955, just a few years before. Ron, I had recently read that Ron had met friends in college who knew about the construction of what was going to be the Colorado Railroad Museum in 1958. And he even started visiting this place while it was being constructed. But we have this image of him going there in January of 1960, right after it opened, and the end of 1959. And it still looks like this today. The building is bright yellow, the cinder block. Obviously, it's expanded on the grounds and what equipment they have on display. And he would continue to shoot photos of this steam era that was getting displaced by the dieselization period. And I really like this one of Mikado 497. The engineer just has this haunting stare. It's hard to look away, really. I am imagining, given that it's 1961 and he's an older man, he might be a veteran of World War II, because he seems to have that 1,000-yard stare. And Ron he didn't take too many pictures of engines that were being scrapped or salvaged or even wrecked. There's a couple of wreckages in the collection, but this one just kind of blew my mind, in part because it looks like a bomb went off in it, and it really might have been, given the ash on the ground. But I just find it really fascinating. And then he went up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, 1 year apart in 61 and 62 to the Union Pacific yards, taking pictures of that infrastructure, the coaling tower, and the yards where Big Boy was being retired. And then I think this one might have gone on to be refurbished. But they're kind of poignant images. I also feel they're lovely with the clouds, but they're poignant in that you see these hulking masses rusting. This one is of the Challenger 3806, also in 1962. And close-up of Big Boy. He didn't take too many close-ups, but I really like this one. It's a good profile of all that mechanization. Now, the Kitty Choo Choo is fun. He continued to take color images of the Kitty Choo Choo that would run between Denver and Longmont, this Colorado and Southern 638. But I really like this one for the juxtaposition with the California Zephyr, and the way those railroaders are standing beside and admiring the smaller engine. I also like the added puff of smoke to the right of the engine by the platform. It's a great angle, great shot. And he enjoyed going to the Colorado Museum. I have notes here. He would serve on the board at the museum for more than 4 decades, with a 13-year stint as president from 1981 to 1994. But he was very involved, as you could see, going there from the very first months, weeks of it being opened and continuously returning. And I really like this image of a steamed up event that was taking place there in the middle of the summer of 1972 with the children in the one train that's running. I just imagine that Ron really understands the kids' excitement and enthusiasm of being there. And this last shot, preservation of Jupiter, which A.J. Russell took famously of the Golden Spike moment and Promontory Point back in 1869. Here is Jupiter all dolled up for the Union Pacific Centennial exhibit in December. It's a great profile, but also a nice kind of color. The reds in here, I think, really are the most attractive, even down to me and my Winstons on the billboard behind. So I understood when I was beginning to digitize the slides that these railfan excursions were really important to Ron, and I didn't want to exclude them. He has documented and was a member of these various groups. So the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, National Historic Railroad Society of the Intermountain Chapter, the Illini Railroad Club, and the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club Pacific Chapter. All the dates you see here on this slide are those that we have represented in this collection that he transferred to us. And I just gained a sense of the community that was evolving and that would be brought together at these on these excursions. And more significantly, I think that Ron must have been really excited when the Union Pacific excursion service started in 1960, because he was jumping right in by the next year. And the image before is in Laramie, Wyoming, of the living legend, 844. Here's a close-up, which also shows me how these moments that brought people together, the photographers and the other rail fans, it gave them a different level of intimacy, I think, or it seems, with the images that were created. And this is a really good shot. And I have to admit, this is one of the first zingers. And that word just flew out of my mouth when I saw this. It's really an amazing, amazing shot for so many reasons. And this third image of that same excursion is really just to give a sense of perspective of the photographer's viewpoints. So you can see where they're on the bridge, and they're able to zoom in across the yard, which we don't see here, but we see here in the background, right? And over here, we can see the downward angle, which he's gaining from those gentlemen to the back in the center. But this image is also really nice because you see the porter here crossing the tracks and the railroaders up here, in addition to the photographers up on the bridge aiming their cameras. It's a really great series of images. Now switching to, let's see, to the National Railroad Historical Society or Mountain Chapter images, I just really love this image. The more I see it, I always tend to zone in on the woman in the orange. But in preparing for tonight, this image and thinking about it gave me really new insight on what these rail fan excursions brought to local communities, that the excursion wasn't only for those in the rail fan community, but it was also the local community that is essentially hosting the train as it's coming through there. And this happens to be on a Sunday, May 6, 1962 in Sheridan, Wyoming. And the woman in orange, flanked by two men in suits, they must be in their Sunday best. So people are coming out after church to witness these trains passing through. Here's another example from 1963, great profile of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 5632 south of Littleton in Colorado. And if I had to caption this one, I would caption it, how many engineer caps do you count? I think there's about 8 in that crowd down there. And I have to say, if I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with these railfan excursion images, but they're rare. Ron, 90% of the collection is really just the train and the landscape, or a rail yard, or an industrial scene. And I asked Ron about that in December. I said, Ron, you don't take pictures with too many people. And he said, no, I was always trying to get them out of my way, but he didn't always succeed. Which is kind of funny. And in this particular one, I enjoy what's going on at the back end of the car, because it just seems like a party. And clearly these excursions were a lot of fun. I also really like the expression of the conductor and the guy next to him on the ground. Here's a black and white one from 1970, again, Sherman, Wyoming. And switching to Illini, with 2 steamers, the Colorado and Southern 638 and Great Western Railway number 990. Again, the 638 is the Kitty Choo Choo. And I can't help but think that leather bags, camera bags, were in that year. And this one is really another zinger in that it's truly mind-blowing. The soft color palette, when I first saw it, really makes me think of a painting from the late 19th century, like a classic scene of a steam train coming through a landscape, that's shows really little sign of human habitation. And then that really sooty mushroom cloud, my gosh. I also enjoy this one of the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club in 1965. Not so much for the train, but the cars. You really see just how the community comes out and is just lining that little highway to catch a glimpse of the train. And then I can also get a sense that these outings could be potentially full of a lot of physical exercise because you're running all over the hill. If you're not down here on the bridge taking a picture of the steam locomotive, you're actually back here where Ron is to get the whole full frame. And I don't remember if I read this or he told me, but Ron, before he started driving European cars, he drove a VW Bug. And I like to think that this little one right here, it was his. The same day at Pine Cliff of the ex-Great Western Railway number 51. And this one, gosh, tremendous composition with this sweep of the cars that really fill the frame. But also I became familiar with the poetry of plumes, smoke plumes. And this is just really a really great timing and capture on this image. Another zinger of the living legend crossing the Platte River in Colorado in 1974. This is a very unusual image for Ron in the collection with this raking sunset. Very beautiful. And then he took some what I think are unknown excursions in the Central States during the time that he was in the military. So he was in the Army at Fort Riley for 2 years from 1962 to 1964. And this one is taken in Amazonia in Missouri, north of St. Joseph, of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 4960. And I really like it too, just for the classic stance of this photographer here, who's probably looking down his Rolleiflex, to this man over here with his cap leaning back to get the plumes of smoke and steam coming out of the engine. Another unknown excursion in Missouri in 1963, a great profile. Next to the Burlington station, there to the left. And then I included this one, which I think is an unknown excursion. He calls it a photo stop on his in his data. But I like it, A, because it's the Yampa Valley mail train that ran between Craig and Denver, I believe. But it's a really cute little train that we'll see again before the night is over. But it's also one where you're not seeing the back sides of photographers. You're seeing the front sides. And I like that for the various activity of the way they're holding their cameras up to their face. And even this gentleman here in the middle, who appears to be holding a movie camera. And I'm going to focus on Hal Wagner here. Hal Wagner was a member of the National Railroad Historic Society Intermountain chapter, and that's how he met Ron, along with Richard Kindig. But this is my segue. First of all, it's very few portraits that Ron has of people, and I wanted to kind of draw attention to that. But Hal Wagner was really influential, it seems, in collaborations with publications, which is one other aspect of Ron making him a whole rail fan, part of that package. So I became aware of Pacific News last summer when I was researching my article that came out in Classic Trains. And I found this one, which has Ron's image at Kildare, Colorado on the cover for March 1975, that was appearing for the Rio Grande Power Parade article by John Strappick, I believe his name was. And Hal Wagner at this time was part of the contributing staff of Pacific News. And in this very article that came out in this issue, which is on the right-hand side, they both had photographs on the same page. And I just wondered to what extent, Ron is beginning to understand the power of publishing and finding friends who can help him advance in that way. And the slide in the middle, of course, is that color cover image. I think it's the master slide, even though it's in a plastic mount. I think that the other mount was damaged, probably, and it's reproducing it. But if the Kildare images look familiar to you, it's because it ended up being on the cover of Rio Grande in the Rockies in 1977 with this auto train. It was Ron's second book. And then the second time I've been able to determine that Ron was published was 2 months later in May, when Ron had a feature article with his photography from Canada and of CP Rail. So on the cover, his image is in the lower left-hand corner here of the lower spiral tunnel area, and then these other spreads, which I'm going to show a little bit more of the facing article page, and then linking it to his other repeat photographs of the same vantage point that appear in the slide collection. So it's the vantage point is in the shadow of Cathedral Mountain, and Mount Stephen is in the background. But these images are spanning 1969 in the middle, 274 on either side. I also discovered only literally in the last 4 weeks that Ron was a contributor to CT Seaboard, which I had never heard of. And I was encouraged by Jeff and Tim to reach out to Dale Sanders, who let me know that Ron was a regular contributor as a news editor covering the Denver and Rio Grande Western, and submitted regular columns. And he also supplied photography, not only for his column, but also for other news features as well. And in this case, he's written again on CP Rail in Winter in the December 1979 issue. And again, just to link up the black and white with the color of the train, the CP rail coal train going through the lorry sheds just west of Rogers Pass in winter. Really, really beautiful. But Ron is probably best known for his books. And this is the string of the books that he had published with Colorado Railroad Museum from 1977 to 1992, co-authoring with other great photographers, some that we have in our collection here. Bill Botkin, Victor Hand, even Kate Botkin, who helped with the layout and design of mountain mainlines of the West. And then you see here also with the Union Pacific, those two issues, Howard Fogg paintings on the cover. And Howard would go on to actually also write the introduction for, I think, Rio Grande West. But publishing isn't about just putting it on paper. It's also putting it on the web. And so one of the exciting and satisfying parts of my job here with the center is being able to put images out there while I'm still processing a collection. Whenever Scott or Adrian, Inga, or Haley have come up with requests, it's easy for me to funnel them images that might be of use to them. And so the first assignment really was 50 Years of Amtrak, where we had put it up in the Flickr gallery. And so here are 3 of Ron's that were posted for 74, 88, and 91. And also what's really fun is Adrian's Worker Wednesday. These are the couple that went up. A handful have actually gone up. And it was always fun to see the reaction of the community. And it's also very exciting. So I used to think that it was really wonderful to see Ron getting the likes at the 300 range, but this CP-FM engine of Fernie, British Columbia, on Ektachrome got up into the 800s, I think, is really impressive and very exciting. And it didn't just do it once, but it did it twice, because we used this image for this promotional piece for this presentation tonight. And both times it was just like blowing up on the internet. Haley has also asked for images. So here are the 2 that she used for the weather effects theme of the 2022 Johnny Gruber contest. And most recently, St. Patrick's Day, I sent Adriana a few with green images, and this one she decided would be a good contender, given the green of the cap of the engineer and the trim of the station. And of course, Burlington Northern is so great with its green. I think Elron snuck one in last Friday, but sorry, Elron, I couldn't include you in tonight's presentation. Erin Rose, our digital, our reference archivist, put together this great, well, she selected the images for this Union Pacific calendar by Willow Creek Press. So if you're interested in having Ron Hill on your wall at home, check them out. It's an 18-month calendar. And then Scott was asked to submit an archive treasure piece to Classic Trains. And so he focused on the Great Northern with this Montana Calling article. And then mine came on the heels in 2022 winter. It was the hardest 1,500 words I've ever had to write, but it's just a stunner. I want to thank Brian Schmidt for the amazing layout. It was actually really fun for me to put this together, and I learned a lot. And it was a really great way to just get Ron's work out there again. We made sure he got a copy and he was able to see it. But the earliest that I know of for the center publishing Ron's work was in Railroad Heritage with Jeff's article, Artistic Integrity Worth Emulating. I've read it a few times. It's incredibly insightful and well written. If you haven't checked it out, or I would say it's worth a visit again if you haven't seen it in a while. And then here's the 2021 Railroad Heritage print version of 50 Years of Amtrak with the Empire Builder east of Summit, Montana in 1973. Beautiful raking light on those mountains and then the reflection in the water. In the fall of 2021, out of the archives fall color edition, another request. Can you find anything that looks really nice for autumn. Yes, we can. So here's this one we've seen a number of times already tonight at Pando, which I understand this location was by a military camp that did winter mountain training for recruits for World War I. Camp Hale, I think it was called. Another image of that cute Yampa Valley mail train in 1966. And then I had a small piece. Adrian interviewed me and our colleague, Gail Taylor, out of the archive, Evolving Digitization Criteria. This one of Slocan City, this whole series blows my mind. But this particular image was one of the first times I realized that railroad photography can look like art in an abstract way, with the negative space, that log pond and all the water around it. It's just fascinating. I mean, the train barge itself is really wild and I want to write about it, but this is an incredible image. And this is a second one at the Tehachapi Loop that I really liked as well, these zingers, as I called them, in 1978. And then most recently, oh, I'm going to get a little bit clamped here. Ron was on our cover. That Scott was very quick thinking and smart as editor to put Ron on the cover. And then this beautiful essay reflecting on Ron Hill, a tribute really to Ron and the friendship that Jeff has had for the 50 years. And the beautiful, beautiful reflections here in this reservoir, which he has so many. He has a handful of these. I like them all very much. They're very beautiful. And with that, we have probably another 15 to 20 minutes. This is the last part that really makes Ron that whole railfan package. It's his photography, right? We've already seen a lot, but what I wanted to conclude on was a montage of the decades, the 60 years of his work. So we'll start with the 1950s. And because there are so few, here's the Denver Rio Grande Railroad roundhouse and turntable. And another one, he has some very small series of streetcars, some in Pittsburgh, some in Philadelphia, some in New Orleans. Here's one in 1959 taken in Pittsburgh around the holidays. It's a great, wow, what a great image. And because the 50s are so small, I've really chalked it up with the 1960s. So I hope nobody will complain. Here's a great image of just motive power of the Union Pacific at the 88th Avenue stop in Denver, Colorado. This appeared in Colorful Colorado Railroads, page 100. Ooh, I think that should read April 16, 1961, sorry. Dropping the fire from the Great Western Railway in Loveland in 1961. And 10 years before this photo was taken, a guy named Richard Steinheimer took one at Thistle, Utah in black and white. And I just feel like this might be Ron's successful homage to that image in color. It is so stunning. And it was really taken within a year that this railroad would stop running, would be retired. We had a contest in October of 2021 to choose a winner scene that would be part of our holiday card. And so Ron won, and Haley put this together, which it was fun to see and be a part of that little internal contest with my colleagues here. And then he also took the same image with his black and white camera. A Nikon, I'll add, he used his Nikon a little bit. He probably wouldn't want anyone to know that, but he did. I had to include an image of Chicago. So this is a pretty amazing shot towards Michigan Avenue with the Art Institute down here on the left-hand corner. But today, this is Millennium Park. And so the criteria I have for having chosen Ron's images were not really that variable. I tried to select images for their historical value, their composition, and the interplay of color and light. This one is obviously for a changed city now. You would use this to maybe know what it looked like 60 years ago. I also had to include Milwaukee, at least Wisconsin. So here we have the North Shoreline Station in 1962 in Milwaukee. There's a lot of brick there. And Ron felt it important to revisit these Southern trains. This was probably taken when he was in the Army at Fort Riley, but this was one of the Worker Wednesday images. It's another great composition, and the way it totally fills the frame. And I always got a sense that Ron looked at his edges and looked at his corners. I mean, it was instinctive for him. He was really technically highly proficient in shooting with film. This is such a sweet image that looks like a Norman Rockwell painting from 1963 out in Pennsylvania. And it's really quite an unusual one for him. It's very sweet. Another, Buell, Alabama. He took the advantage when he was at Fort Riley to travel across Alabama and Mississippi, and I believe Arkansas, on the short lines, to document the short lines, because he felt, I asked him about this as well last December, and he said, well, he just feels that people don't go there. And now I don't think these tracks exist. This would have been back when they were harvesting yellow pine. In 1964, here's another one. I believe this is in Colorful Colorado Railroads, but I learned that this one's called the Black Widow from Wells, Nevada, Southern Pacific Freight. And Union Pacific Freight with the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific. The rocket here is moving. The Pacific Freight is standing still. This one also is from Colorful Colorado Railroads. This one is also very unusual. I love it because it looks like a movie still. I think there's a lot going on here of different narratives. But Tim told us on Thursday when we did a dry run that you can't get near Moffett Tunnel anymore. It's all chain link fenced off. So this would be regarded, again, like, I find aesthetic qualities in this image, but it's also got historical value. And this one, oh my gosh, I found this one pretty early in my digitization, and it's truly just like an outlier. It's the only one that the slide mount, for instance, says Cessna 172. I don't know how often Ron got into an airplane, but I like the abstract quality of this. I'm not sure which train it is, but it's of a train going through Hermosa Tunnel in Wyoming, and the train is up here. You can barely make out the plume. So the engine is here, and it wraps all the way around over to here, if you can see my cursor, from 1962 with that snowscape. It's really fascinating. This is the first year that Ron started going to British Columbia in Canada in 1966. Katie from Missouri in 1967. I really like this one too. It's flat light, but you do get a sense for like a rainy day. One of the streetcars he shot in NOLA in 1967. And the Valmont Reservoir Power Plant. He has a few of these. I like this one. This was in Colorful Colorado Railroads, page 26 from 1968. I think one thing I didn't mention at the start was that, Ron was mostly shooting with Kodachrome, but there were times where he would use Ektachrome and Agfa. And then by the 90s and noughts, he's using almost exclusively Provia and Velvia. And really, you see the different color palettes and the way the film is capturing that color across all these different film brands in his collection. Another of CP Rail in 69 with the maroon and gray, that engine, or the few engines, the SD40s. And this final one of the Union Pacific Yards, U.S. Army Alco in the center there in black. Again, from the from his Colorful Colorado Railroads book. Let's see, how are we? All right, we're moving along. Oh, he liked bridges. And so there's a lot of bridges, stone and metal, some with still narrow trestles. It's another great part of the infrastructure that he was interested in and captured. City of Kansas City. I love the color gradient and that smoke plume from black to white. It's like tremendous timing, great angle. And from 1971. And Milwaukee Railroad Switcher in Butte, Montana from 1971. This one was a Worker Wednesday favorite. No surprise. Great profile of this E81. And I like this one. I'm not sure what others think. It's at the Inman Yard in Atlanta, Georgia. We don't have too many from the South, the deep South. But I really like the color palette. For one, the green and the rust of the auto train that's sort of center left is replicated in the foliage of those trees in the upper right-hand corner. But then you kind of get, I was fascinated by these lights that are suspended over the yard. There's so many of them when you look back towards the left. It's really fascinating at the Inman Yard for the Southern Railway freights. It is obviously a very busy place at that time. I had to put in a caboose. He doesn't shoot too many cabooses, but and actually the two that I really like are Blurred, which he also didn't do very often. And this stunner from 1975 from a Union Pacific excursion with the NRHS east of Perkins. It's really beautiful. Here's an Atkinson Topeka Santa Fe Super C in 1975, getting ready for the bicentennial, I'm guessing. He was big, I think, and I'm guessing he was very competitive with himself, because there are 93 different pieces of equipment that I've counted in the collection that's off of the mainlines or on mainline trains. And so this is one of those unique pieces that I just had to digitize because it seemed important for its historical value. From Kicking Horse Canyon in 1977, another one that I like for its abstract value of the negative space in the forest, and then that Y of the white snow and the way that the train tracks are forced to contour themselves by the river, giving it those lovely curves. And again, Slocan City just blows my mind. I really want to write about this place. And Scott knows that my next article, hopefully I'll get it done by the end of this year, is going to be on the relationship between railroads and extractive industries of natural resources using Ron's images. But there's so many stories in here. You've got this diving pontoon and the train barge with the little ISIS tugboat and the log pond. I mean, it's so interesting. It's a fascinating part of Canada, and it's tucked away. You got to get down there from the main highway one. The monumentality of the mountains there, which Ron loves so much, really is emphasized here in this one, Kicking Horse Flats. And then, wow, this I think is a zinger. I grew up since I like 1975, 76, knowing of the copper mine, because my grandparents live on the eastern part of Salt Lake City, and they had a view towards the west where this mine is situated. But I never knew what it looked like inside. So when I saw this, I was like, what in the heck? But this is such a fascinating series of images. There's only about 4 of them in the collection, but I would want to include this in the article on the extractive industries. It's really fascinating. I had no idea there were railroads in there. I think this is the last one for the 70s. The left-hand image from August 79 became a note card. For obvious reasons, it's really beautiful, but he seemed to go back to this tunnel to capture the Rio Grande Zephyr at Pine Cliff a few times. The one on March 1980 is really lovely, the way those tracks are golden by the lights of the train. But there's an image from February that appeared in his Rio Grande West. So that might be the one, if you're familiar with this series, that you probably know. I'm going to probably go a little faster here and talk less. But I do. One of the other great things about Ron's collection is that because I am a native Westerner, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I went to school out in Tacoma, Washington, and we would travel through Colorado and Utah and Montana and Wyoming for vacations. I love that I was revisiting all of these places from my archive bench and discovering new places. I had no idea there was a place called Troublesome, Colorado. And this one makes me laugh because it was the first time Ron ever hit 1,200 likes on a Worker Wednesday. And I couldn't tell like if it was because it was the Santa Fe engines, SD40-2s, or it was the guy with the handlebar mustache. Derail. Oh, this one, quick story on Lytton, British Columbia. I was digitizing this in the early part of June 2021 rather. And that was when the first heat dome was situating itself over the Pacific Northwest. And again, I digitized this more for its historic value of a little of the Canadian National going into this smaller town, Lytton. But literally 2 weeks later, the headlines were talking about Lytton because in June 30th of 2021, it reached degrees of 121 degrees Fahrenheit, and a wildfire started, burning the whole village down by 90%. And I don't think that much of it's been recaptured or rebuilt, rather. Here's another one. This is the bridge going into Lytton over the Fraser River, I believe, in 1981. And then moving into New Mexico with these soft color palette of the desert. This is a meet. Actually, the two trains are going to intersect right here. But I really like it for its the vastness of the environment that Ron is so great in capturing in so many of his images, that huge landscape. More, this is a Abo Canyon near Sace, New Mexico. And what it looks like in rain. So I'm slipping in a 1990s one from 95, but I can almost smell the rain in this image. It's so beautiful to capture that desert foliage in the mesas there and the arroyos. Another one from Kildare with a forest fire in the back there in the upper right-hand corner. And a winter palette of color in Belleville, the crossover at Belleville of Southern Pacific, which this series sort of also blew my mind because I didn't know a black train could look so great on a landscape. And in the summertime, it's equally beautiful. So more repeat photography by Ron. More troublesome coal trains in January. Another one near Pando in 1994, winter shot. Oh, this was really beautiful for all the autumn colors. Near Minturn, Colorado, which is right near Leadville for the most part, which was very popular for Ron. He went there all the time. And the ski train, he also documented. This is an unusual one, the straight on with it going through the tunnels 2 and 3 in 1995, which would go from Denver to Winter Park. And then this storm light is really stunning here. in California. And more beautiful southwestern images of Yarmany, Colorado. And I'm sorry, we're getting long now, so I'll try to wrap it up. We're getting close. The sky, he captures clouds really nicely. He also does reflections really nicely. And I've combined the last 2 decades. I love this one with the hoarfrost. Wow, it's just so beautiful. He's really a fair weather photographer. He doesn't go out into storms much, but he doesn't mind the cold. Finger Rock was a new place to me. This appears a number of times, and I know it's in some of his books. 2006. I like this one for the shadows, the cloud shadows on the landscape that really also make the train in the lower foreground stand out. And those big clouds again. A lovely one of Raking Light. Coal Creek, Colorado, 2006. And Azure, he goes to Azure quite a bit. This is in 2007, but he first started going there in 1980. So I wanted to show you one of his earliest images from this, so you could call it a sub-series of this location. He also has some more heritage trains in Nevada, the Nevada Northern here. And this must be an homage to David Plowden. He doesn't go to Bonneville Flats and Wendover, Utah much. This is there's only about 4 slides of this location, but this is really beautiful. And wow, I never knew Big Ten Loop existed, but I really think that this train, the coal train, the Union Pacific coal train, captures its sweep S-turns, S-curves so lovely. And Palmer Lake is also is featured quite a bit with Ben Lomond Mountain. And this is the inverse with its reflection in the lake. And this is what you normally see. And this was the last one taken in 2018 when Ron was 81 years old. So I'm going to end, well, there's 3 more slides. I wanted to show a little collage of the fact that he also shot stations and towers. And I'd like to end on this final image in Reno Junction, Wyoming, 1995. As a way to celebrate Ron's work. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you, Ron, for all the work and dedication and whole rail fan package work that you did. I mean, I don't know, Haley, if you want to hand it back.
Yeah, I mean, wow, stunning, Heather. And what a worthy tribute to someone who has such a tremendous legacy. And it's so great to get your reflections as an archivist and as someone who's relatively new to the railroad photography community. It's just a really great breath of fresh air. And I know we have Jeff and Tim on the line as well, who can speak much more to Ron as a person than I can. I never got the opportunity to meet him. But I mean, if you take a look in the chat now, you'll see the outpouring of appreciation for your presentation.
I think you could easily go another hour here, it seems like.
I'm glad to hand it over to you guys. I'm gonna mute myself now.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll jump into the Q&A, and I just want to remind you guys to submit any questions you have. But actually, Heather, a question to start off with for you, and I'm actually going to combine 2 questions that came in because they're relate to each other. So, when you're as an archivist, when you're approaching a collection, how do you determine which images are digitized and which are not. And then looking at the Ron Hill collection, can you remind us how much of it is digitized and if there would ever be an opportunity for more to be digitized?
Sure. So we've digitized 13% of Ron Hill's collection, and that's actually, we aim for 10%. I went a little crazy on the Canadian ones, and and so that might have pushed the 10% to 13. And I would probably and could easily go back to Canada, because I realized in preparing for tonight that I don't have any color ones of Morant's Curve, which he was discovering when he started going there in winter in 1977 and 78. But my criteria for digitizing is, I touch on it a little bit, but really it's historic value, it's artistic value. It's also some of his signature shots. You know, the repeat photography is very strong and important to Ron. So when I started seeing locations with vantage points being replicated, I wanted to keep that going throughout the collection. So you see that same location over time if you wanted to go back and track it, as well as some of his other, I guess you could call them series, like the reflection shots. They're variable, but they are throughout the entire collection. I wanted to capitalize on his attention to that element of water in a composition. And so those are some of the criteria that I had.
Okay, oh, great. I'm gonna swing it over to Jeff and Tim now. I can already see, or have seen throughout the presentation, some people reflecting on times where they've gone out and photographed with Ron. Jeff and Tim, I know both of you have done that. So I don't know, would either of you like to kind of walk us through a day in the field with Ron and what that whole experience was like?
You want to go first, Tim, or you want me to?
I'll let you go first.
All right. Well, I think the story that I told in the recent issue of Railroad Heritage was indicative when you were taking a long trip with Ron. I mean, he was very organized. He was very, I think his days in the military, you know, got him up early, got him out quickly, and everything was very efficient. And I do remember that on that one trip up to Idaho, I mean, it was a solid 12 or 15 hour drive because he was determined to get there. But, you know, in just listening to everybody speaking tonight, I really realized that one of the great things about Ron is that when you were out with him, he was having a really good time. You know, he was having fun. And I can tell you, and I'm sure that there are a lot of fans tonight who will appreciate the fact that, you know, a lot of times you can be out taking photographs and it can be pretty frustrating because the light's not right, the train's not there. And other circumstances can happen to sort of interrupt the flow. But Ron was, he always kept things very light. And he was a great teaser, which I think I referred to in the article. I think I was a little too serious as a young man. And I think that if I know that when we got together later in the 90s and the 2000s, we really, it was very relaxed, you know, and I think that that playfulness and that joyfulness kind of comes through in the photography. And I think he enjoyed, I know I spoke a little bit to John Garden recently, and I know that he just really enjoyed all those relationships that he created with everybody. And I seem to remember that there were a couple times we met in Tehachapi where he had brought some other friends of his along, and I brought a couple friends of mine, and it was all very collegial and, you know, just enjoyed hanging out together. And yeah, so I'll start that off there. Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I agree. Ron was great to hang out with. He knew a lot of people who were rail fans throughout the country. But Ron, at least once you got to know him, was quite a character. And although he would dish it out, you certainly could give it back to him. Yeah. He never forgave me for shooting my Nikons, and he did convince me to get a Leica along the way, which I still have. But I shot the Nikons before the Leica, and then heaven forbid I went to digital. I heard about that right up to a month before his passing, that I was unforgiven for using digital. But Ron would take as much as he gave. And in talking to Jeff, I think I learned that more because Ron would dish it out to me, but I would give it right back, and he would be fine. To some people, he may have seemed he was abrasive. I don't think he came across that to people he didn't know too much, but he was very giving of knowledge and information. Certainly when I first met him, I had not shot too often with other rail fans. I met him when I was 20 and started shooting regularly with him when I was around 24. And we shot many weekends in the 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. And he gave so much more than he took in terms of photographic knowledge. It was a true joy to be with Ron. And I truly miss him, and will always be a dear, dear friend of mine.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Leica, because we actually got a question about that in the Q&A. Well, someone asking if Ron ever used a Leica SL or an SL2, and based on your Nikon story. So what sort of cameras did he use, and what can you speak more to his strong opinions on which ones ought to have been used?
Well, he had told me, and I think Jeff saw him, he had used Nikon a little bit early on, but quickly came to the Leica camp, and he stuck with that. So the entire time I shot with Ron, which would have been 82, met him in 77, so 81, 82 onward shooting, he was always the Leica for the 35 millimeter, and then the Hasselblad for a large format. So those were the two I knew him with. He was overwhelmingly a slide shooter with the 35 millimeter. I don't know if he ran much in the way of black and white. I never saw that. And then as Kodachrome faded, he definitely became a Fuji shooter in the 90s, maybe even a little earlier, but the 90s onward, right up until the very end.
Well, I think you could probably make the case that he got a Hasselblad, I think, in the late 70s or early 80s. And I remember I remember that I think the Hasselblad, when he bought it, was $550. And he was after me you've got to get one of these. You've got to get one of these. The optics are incredible. And, I was all of early 20s and barely, making a living. And I think all I could afford was a Mamiya C330, which is $280 or something. But long story short, his philosophy did prevail, because I eventually, got a Hasselblad and a Leica. And I think underneath all that, and this is what I experienced, and I'm sure people have a different opinion about all this, but I think what he was saying is that, if you're using good equipment, it kind of raises the bar for you. It's almost like you've got to bring a little more of yourself to justify that quality or something. I'm not saying it correctly, but I know that for myself, I think I took myself more seriously as a photographer when I ended up with some better equipment. It's like I didn't want to let the equipment down. I mean, that sounds kind of goofy, but the optics on the Hasselblad and the Leica they're fantastic. They're really fantastic. And as you found out, Heather, I mean, throughout his career, throughout his, what do we want to say, his technical prowess, he was always at a very high level. So it was always really good photographic papers, the right developers, the right enlarger, all down the line. And in retrospect, it made sense, because those prints do look beautiful and those negatives do look beautiful. One thing I wanted to say, just out of curiosity, because I noticed in your list, and and relating to what Tim just said, I think in the early 80s, when he got the Hasselblad, he pretty much relegated that camera to black and white negatives. But I noticed in your list, did the center get a lot of black and white 2¼ negatives? Wow, that's interesting because,
Mm,
okay, well, something to investigate because,
So I've only seen mostly 35 millimeter and then a few, very few 2¼ color.
wow,
mm,
because all those 8x10 prints that you have are probably
Yeah.
all Hasselblad negatives.
Mm.
So
agreed.
There's more to be discovered out there. Heather, when digitizing this collection, how many hours a day did you spend, well, digitizing, and how long did it all take?
Well, so when I was hired as a contract archivist, I had to remember, like, why did it take me so long to do the preliminary processing plan from December to February or early March? And it was in part because I was hired to only work 15 hours a week. I had other jobs, and the center wasn't, I think they needed somebody to start the Ron Hill collection, but it was really on a contract basis. And then I didn't go to, I think I was bumped up to 20 by May or June of 2021. And it has only been recent that I've gone to 30 hours. So really, I can't say how many hours a day. It's really more of a week. But I tend to bracket when I digitize. We're using digital cameras to reshoot the slides. And I do try to keep as what's the word, as true to Ron's color as possible.
Mm.
In fact, tonight I had to use a sharpening tool because there seems to be something that when you bring in the image into your PowerPoint, it takes away from that sharpness, so which really astonished me. And I'm like, oh my God, Ron shot with a Leica. I have to make these look like the way you
Yes.
shot them. And I really didn't dink around much else with contrast or anything. So what you see is really what I was seeing.
Mhm. Off of that, we have a question from one of our attendees. He says, "I saw a lot of photo. Oops, sorry, someone asked another one, so it went away. I saw a lot of photos with shadow detail seriously underexposed. Was that the Kodak's fault? Maybe using Kodachrome, or the scanner's fault, or maybe something with the light meter? Would you have an idea about that?"
No.
No.
I guess to that, I do tend to shoot a little on the dark side so that we can capture what's in the shadows if we want to post-process in any way. But I'd have to see some examples in order to answer that question more accurately.
No worries. Then for Jeff, Kevin Scallion asks, since your photographic style and focus differ so greatly from Ron's, how were locations chosen while you were out with him?
hi, Kevin. Well, that was a bit of we got into some conflict sometimes because, he, like I said, he was very much in the mindset of sort of chasing the train and pulling over and taking a photograph and everything. I think I did best when I was at a location where we were like a Tehachapi or a Mojave in California, where I could get out and I could explore the environment, and Ron might be by the tracks taking pictures of trains as they left the yard or they were going, around the loop or whatever. So, well, I mean, for me, I guess I kind of realized that we did have very different styles, and it was a situation where I kind of had to just, in some ways, kind of go about my own way. And but that in fact, it's interesting to me. I was thinking just recently that there'd be an interesting series of articles about buddy relationships. The Ted Benson and Tom Taylor, Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg, Dick Steinheimer and Don Sims, and wondering how everybody did work that equation out. Because I mean, a lot of times, two photographers will stand in the same place and take the picture, but a lot of other times, you have to go your own way. And I think for myself, I know that just in terms of my own career and everything, I think I eventually decided that I liked, and this had nothing to do with Ron because I moved to Colorado. I moved to California in '78, and so I started my own path in a certain way. But I think, a lot of us probably enjoy being by ourselves because, again, it gives us the ultimate freedom to go where you need to go and stay as long as you need to stay. And, it's being out with another rail fan in whether it was my friend Ed Delvers or Pat Berry, there was always, it seemed like there was always some politics a little bit to negotiate, one way or the other. But in terms of with Ron, like I said, the later trips in the 90s and the 2000s were really, they ended up being more of a visit, in the sense that we were kind of two friends hanging out, and it got to the point where it wasn't really necessarily about taking pictures of trains. I mean, that was the excuse for getting together, but it was, it was really just to be with in each other's company for a couple of days. So anyway.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. Well, we've mentioned a few times Ron's meticulous quality in just about everything that every way he approached life. When you were out photographing, though, were there moments of spontaneity, or did he know where he wanted to go and those were the spots he went, and there wasn't any meandering?
I would certainly, here in Colorado, well, even on our trips to New Mexico and Wyoming, in many cases, Ron had been there before. He was older than I was and had been shooting, obviously, a lot longer. So he knew the locations. And that, coupled with the fact that he would go back to the same locations repeatedly, brought a very strong dynamic where Ron knew where he wanted to go. He knew where he wanted to go on the season of the year and the time of day. And in many ways, it was difficult to convince him otherwise. That's certainly true early on. As the years went by and more time went, he would be more open to changing it a little bit, but he decidedly had his angles in mind at places that have already worked and was happy to show you where to go, but not necessarily deviate far from the script. And interesting, just since you bring up the detail-oriented, and you showed some of his notes, I just remember every shot anywhere in the entire time I knew Ron. He wrote down all the particulars in his book. That same book that we saw the image of, I saw over and over the entire time I knew Ron.
Yeah, and Heather, how much does that differ from some other collections you've worked on?
Well, I can't compare, and I'm not going to compare with what I've done in the center because I haven't had much experience here with other collections, but I am working on one at the Wisconsin Historical Society of a professional commercial photographer who also had 27,000 negatives, and that studio it began family run, and it's not as meticulously documented in any kind of extra ledger, if you will. So I've known other photographers who I've worked with here in Wisconsin that were very, very meticulous and clean and detailed in their notes. And it is really the easiest to process. That's for sure.
Awesome. I believe we're about to have a special guest pop up in here.
I don't know if special is the word, but I was just, I had a question for Jeff and Tim. When I grew up and learned of Ron's work, I first discovered him in CT Seaboard magazine. He was editing the Rio Grande column, and then I started to see his great pictures. And then I picked up a couple of his books, one of which co-authored with you, Jeff. And then, of course, his Union Pacific Mainline West book. And I wonder, everyone always says how Ron is so synonymous with Rio Grande, but it seems to me like he had quite a fondness for Union Pacific too. I mean, he has really grand, majestic portraits and action photos. And so I just wanted to hear what your guys' thoughts were on that, as far as the great debate on which was his railroad.
Well, it seems to me, I seem to recall several trips to Cheyenne, and I think he was really enamored with the big power. And I was telling Heather the other day, because we were just talking about some, that he generally liked to shoot in fair weather, but I have a beautiful 16x20 that was taken on a 44 trip or 3985, I forget which one, in the winter. And it's maybe near Sherman. I don't know the locations that well, but heavy snowfall and massive locomotive. And I want to say that he liked the big power, the DD-35s and the U-50s and the Rio Grande. I don't know, was kind of. It always seemed it seemed much more romantic to me, as a railroad, and the landscape that it ran through. And the Union Pacific seemed just kind of more industrial and everything. And I think that Ron sort of picked up on that. I mean, I've never really thought about that question, but that's kind of a free form answer. So,
I wonder if, when you ask that and I think about it, at least to me, Ron talked a lot about the CP and also the Grand. And if I think of the common denominator, and maybe it's not the railroad, but the setting that the railroad's in. So at least with me, I would nod towards Grand and CP over the UP. With the UP, Ron would talk to me about the steam excursions and how I missed out by not doing those, but it wasn't something in the 80s, 90s, 00s, we went up to Cheyenne to shoot like we did everywhere else. So I think maybe it's the terrain and the trains in that setting, but the Rio Grande was also his hometown, local small railroad.
Oh, sure. So maybe with Union Pacific, it was more about the power, and with CP and Rio Grande, it was more about that grand stage, all that gorgeous scenery. Yeah,
that's what that's what seems to be.
Well, and he had a real fondness for Montana too, and the Northern Pacific, Great Northern Milwaukee Road, all running across it again in that dramatic mountain setting. And I think it was as those roads, and particularly the Milwaukee, wound down, that he started going up to Canada as kind of the next best thing after that.
Oh, that's great.
He did talk a lot about the Milwaukee too, as well.
Nice.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Good. Well, it looks like we have 2 more questions in the Q&A. So the next one I'm going to send to you, Heather. As you were digitizing this collection, did your process change at all from the beginning to the end?
No, I think in part because Ron's collection is pretty straightforward. Once we had decided how we were going to arrange it, it was really just me picking out slides. My hands have probably been on every single slide at least twice to look at it. Say yes, no, oh my God, that's a zinger, yes. But the process really didn't change. Though those finding tools were something that I'm glad I did start early on, because they came in handy as I continued to move through each box and then every carton and every slide tray.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's very good.
Then could I jump in just real quick to respond to a previous question about Ron's medium format negatives? And I know his entire estate's in probate right now. I know that there will be additional materials coming to us once that's finished. So I'm hopeful that we'll, still get some more of those images that may still have been in his possession. Certainly hoping that we might. So I think there'll be more to come.
Okay.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Well, then this last question, I put it out to all of our panelists that are on right now. If there's one thing or one kind of strong thing that stands out in your memory of something that Ron taught you or that you learned from him, what would it be?
See the light, and sharpness matters. He was certainly strong opinion about the sharpness, which ties to the technical gear, to the lenses you use. So he really was that. And then, know your light, know where you're standing in relation to the light.
I would say, for looking at Ron's collection, and I guess I have the benefit of having seen a lot of different collections and worked with a lot of photographers over the years, but from Ron, I only knew him later in life, but he was very well prepared to present his work. He had those phenomenal black and white prints. He had all of his slides organized into those Leica trays that he could pull out and pop into the projector, and they were already well edited and ready to go. He did a phenomenal job publishing his work over the course of his life through magazines, through books. He later did with the Colorado Railroad Museum. And he took phenomenal notes. So he was someone who really did a tremendous job of caring for his own legacy while he was in a position to do that. And I think that's made his photography more valuable, kind of by establishing its value in the present, and then also preparing people like us to come in and really, jump right in and be able, as you say, have there's kind of this very straightforward collection to work on. And so I think Ron is just a phenomenal example of how to really ensure that your photography collection will be, presented and preserved in the best light.
Well, I'm going to jump off the reservation because of a little bit here. And I confirm everything that's just been said about his preparedness and technical skills and desire for sharpness and optics and everything. But, I reflect back on my friendship with him, and I think there was a continuity. He worked at, that's not the right word. I was going to say he was a very consistent friend. And I mean, he pretty much wrote a letter or a postcard or something almost every month. And I think that he taught me the value of that consistency in friendship, and what that meant. And to be able to know somebody for 40 years and sort of go through the transitions of your life and still maintain this continuity, which is the continuity shows up in his work, but there was also a continuity in the way that he approached his life. And I think that to me is, just a very valuable lesson. And, it's an honor to have been his friend. I'm going to get a little choked up here. I mean, it's it was really sad to see him go. And I really thought, he had told me he had an aunt that lived to be 102. And Ron was a solid, he was sturdy, and, was an avid bike rider. He was sturdy. And I really thought I was looking forward to the 100th birthday myself. So, but anyway, it's just that continuity of friendship that I really deeply appreciate. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I look back on my life, I have 2 or 3 friends that have 45 years, and Ron was one. And I don't want to say he never changed. He did. He mellowed a little bit.
Yeah.
But a lot of the Ron I knew in 77, was the same Ron I knew 3 months ago, 2 months ago. So yeah, I'm the same way. It's been hard, but he was a good friend.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, well, clearly with the impact that he's had on your guys' lives, and the material and the cultural legacy that he's left through his work for road preservation, road history, and road imagery. And I think that's a great place to leave it. So thank you, Heather, for that spectacular presentation. It was
Thanks, Heather.
truly, truly one of our finest. And thank you to Jeff and Tim for jumping on and sharing their reflections of Ron and what he meant to them, and personally, and also through his photography. I want to just remind everyone that we are recording tonight's presentation. We'll make that available on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. I'll drop that link in the chat now. It's youtube.com/railphotoart. You'll be able to find this one as well as mostly all of our past programs there as well. Our next program is going to be next month on April 25th, collections from England's National Railroad Museum, and we'll be opening registrations for that probably next or later this week or early next. So thank you again, everyone. This has been a real treat, really great presentation.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Honor.
Thank you. See you all next month.